thank you so much, everybody, for being here. There are hundreds and hundreds of chairs and hundreds of people filling those chairs in this room. I'm excited that this is the 5th annual Diversity Summit. It's hard to believe that we've had 5 summits at this point, building on a strong history and a strong engagement from the campus community. And so thank you to those of you for whom this is your first Diversity Summit, and thank you to those of whom this is your 5th Diversity Summit here at Geneseo. Every Diversity Summit has a different theme. This summit's theme is Campus Climate, Learn, Engage, Take Action. There's been a number of sessions throughout the day, all hoping and moving towards learning and engaging and taking action to improve and better our campus climate. So when I think about the roughly 1,000 people who probably participated in today's sessions and the hundreds of people who are in this room right now, I'm watching more chairs sort of fill the back of the room, I think not only about people who are learning and engaging, but also about the 1,000 or more actions that are going to result from today's engagement. I want to give you just a moment of silence to think about what you've learned today and to think about at least one action that you're going to take to improve campus climate as a result of today's engagement. I hope you take more seconds later as I cut that moment of seconds off. The Diversity Summit is a labor of love with work shared by many people. Sarah and I are some of those people, but I want to give a special shout out to Carrie Ferciris and Noelia Ruiz, who have done an amazing work, really pulling off a lot of the logistics and volunteer coordination of today's summit. As well, I want to thank the presenters, many of whom are students, and students working collaboratively with faculty and staff from various departments. It's the sessions that bring the summit to life. The sessions that are across the day are what the campus proposed. The Diversity Summit is a mirror for the campus to really say this is what's important to us, and these are the sessions we want to present and facilitate as well as learn from. So thank you to the many presenters and the students who took initiative to present today. We also have almost 40 volunteers who helped today, staffing the info desk in Bailey, serving as room hosts, giving out fabulous t-shirts in the back, and more. And so from the early summit days of scraping maybe 5 volunteers together to 40 people signing up to the point where we had to turn people away, thank you to the volunteers. Thank you to Student Association for sponsoring today's keynote, and to Abby for doing a lot of moderation later in the keynote. And a last thank you to Campus Auxiliary Services for supporting through water and coffee throughout today's earlier programming. At this point, I'd like to invite President Battles up to share a couple additional words of welcome.
Well, thank you, Robbie and Sarah, and I have to say I came in a little early and sat down in the front. It is just a delight to see this full ballroom, and so I'm very appreciative that you all turned out in such numbers. As I look around the room too, I'm seeing students who are in sessions who mustered up the courage to offer their contributions. I see individuals, faculty and staff who are there, presenters, community members, alums. It really is a source of great pride. As Robbie said, this has been a journey over 5 years to develop this Diversity Summit, and it really is a thrill to see what it has become. As president, I have the distinct privilege of leading this college, and you've heard from Robbie the summit's theme, which is very appropriately focusing on our campus climate on the heels of our campus climate survey of students. And I know I was in multiple sessions today in which students shared and interpreted results from that survey. And part of the goal here, as has been articulated, is to learn about that and to better understand our campus, to engage, to actively participate, not just be passive and listen, but really to engage actively and ultimately to take action. And so I will echo Robbie's hope that there will be at least 1,000 actions that came out of today's sessions and this keynote and what is yet to come, because all of this helps us to be a culture that is continuously striving to improve. We know, especially through the Campus Climate Survey, and it has highlighted that we have ample opportunities to improve, to get better, and the fact that we have so many individuals on our campus participating shows me the depth of commitment to that culture of continuous improvement. I do hope that you had the opportunity to engage in one or more sessions as I did. And certainly I'm thrilled that you are joining us here today to listen to our keynote speaker, who will be introduced shortly, Emmanuel Kulu Jr. And in fact, I had the privilege to be in that session earlier today. I want to thank you for being here, not just to provide the keynote, which is a heavy lift in and of itself, but to engage so actively in supporting our day. And I hope that through your experiences of the summit, whether they extended the full day or this particular session, have helped you, as they have me, celebrate the bonds that unite us and hear from those with different perspectives from our own, because it's through that listening and engaging that we all help establish a better climate for all of us, and especially those that we're mostly here for, our students. And so I want to express, you've heard some, and we engaged in some applause, but I think it can't be overstated. A large number of individuals helped to participate in making today happen, whether they were presenters, and those included students, faculty, staff, alumni who came back, gave of their time to present, the volunteers, the people behind the scenes who put this all together, and despite the fact that we heard from Robbie and Sarah, I don't think we had a chance to acknowledge their own contributions to making this come together. And so if we could take a moment and just acknowledge all of those who had a hand in putting together today's agenda. Like you are anxiously awaiting hearing from our keynote speaker. And so with that, I will thank you again for your attendance today and turn it back over to Robbie and Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rattles, for those meaningful words. I have the honor of introducing our awesome MC, Abby George. So excited. I want to tell you a little bit about Abby. She's going to be moderating the Q&A at the end, offering closing remarks, and she's really our MC today. So Abby is a junior sociology major, and she's involved in SA as Director of Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access. She's an academic peer mentor, a member of Zeta Phi Beta, Phi 9, Psychology, Microaggressions Research Group as well. And she presented earlier. Yes. Abby aims to get her master's and her PhD, get it, in fields incorporating counseling and criminal justice. She hopes to obtain a career where she's able to help communities of color in the criminal justice system and encourage mental health among adolescents. Abby also hopes to travel to various countries all around the world and expose herself to new and familiar cultures. Come on up, Abby.
Hi everyone, so thank you all for having me here today. It's so nice to see so many of your lovely faces and some familiar faces. I hope you guys have been having a great day today with Diversity Summit. I want to thank you all for attending sessions. If you attended my session, I'm glad to see some familiar faces. So today I'm going to introduce our special keynote speaker, Emmanuel Kulu. My apologies. Emmanuel Kulu. So a short intro to who Emmanuel Kulu is and his work. Emmanuel Kulu Jr. is an African historian, author of Cameroonian descent. He has a career as a social worker, and Kulu also expresses his deep passion for history, writing, the creative arts, and film. Kulu began his professional creative career in 2015 with film writing and acting with films such as The Rise and Fall of Teflon and Bug Love and The First Purge. In more recent years, Kulu turned his focus to his African lineage. After several years of deep study and research of great African kingdoms, Kulu was drawn to ancient Egypt as the monarch of African studies and inequities. Kulu questioned the validity of prior novel and film depictions of who the ancient Egyptians were, and in fact, African people. My apologies. As an African historian, Kulu has traveled nationally and internationally, giving lectures, seminars, and conferences on the miseducation of African history at various high schools, colleges, and universities. Based on historical research, Kulu created a historical fiction adventure series based on true events, I, Black Pharaoh, Rise to Power, and I, Black Pharaoh, Golden Age of Triumph. These novels were published and released in 2020 and 2021, respectively, by Pennant Publications, my apologies. Both novels restore the true African imagery of ancient Egypt, Kemet. In 2022, Kulu founded the Ancient African Inequities Research Institute of America, with the missions of creating a middle and high school curriculum for African studies. This curriculum will provide educational diversity and a new understanding of the inclusion of African studies within world history for educators and students. So with this in mind, please give a welcoming round of applause for Emmanuel Kulu, Jr.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to Sarah, Robbie, for having me today. It is an honor to be here at Geneseo University. And with that, we'll get right into Black history and the origins of humanity. Again, as was mentioned earlier, that how I started a company called ARIA, which is Ancient African Antiquities Research Institute of America. It's a passion of mine to show the true African origins of humanity. So today, we're going to learn how everyone can come into the scope of African history. So before we get started, I'm going to show a little bit of video about Ancient African Antiquities Research Institute of America, and then we can go from there. Greetings all, and ashe to the world. Welcome to ARIA, Ancient African Antiquities Research Institute of America. I am African historian Emmanuel Kulu. For the last 5 years, I've spent time traveling the country, teaching the miseducation of African history. Our mission is to restore, reclaim, and reveal the missing part of the human story, Mama Africa. From ancient Egypt to ancient Mali, to ancient Kush, to Axum, Abyssinia, all of the great ancient African kingdoms we will be bringing to light to you. You are welcome to join us, educational institutions, colleges, universities, all over the world, to enlighten the beautiful history that has been rooted from human history. Well, welcome to ARIA, where we restore the truth. Let's give a round of applause for Ancient African Antiquities, guys. All right, let's get right into it. So this is my novel, I, Black Pharaoh, Rise to Power. There is a secondary edition to this, which is called I, Black Pharaoh, Golden Age of Triumph. The only difference between the books is that this one, the Golden Age, has 2 extra chapters, but it is a continuation of the first book. Okay, this is a best-selling novel as of in 2021, so please give a round of applause for that. And that will be available right after. All right, so starting right here, the Sankofa. This is a Yoruba sign that says, look back and fetch it. So how this relates to history is for one to move forward, he must know where he came from. So this is what the Sankofa represents. Now, Richard Nixon. Whoever heard of Richard Nixon, raise your hand, please. All right. This is what he had to say about us in America, Americans. He said, the American people don't believe anything until they see it on television. So we're going to see what has been told to our vision
in regards to African and Black history. Now, when we talk about looking at certain commercials, we usually are seeing about commercials like this that are telling us to help Africa, correct? We're seeing an impoverished Africa, a sick Africa. We're seeing mud huts. We're seeing the transatlantic slave trade. We're seeing constant stories of this. What else are we seeing? We're seeing violence, Ebola, mud huts, terrorism. But what you might not see is the brotherly love, the ancient kingdoms, which we're going to talk about today, and the beautiful scenery. In fact, Africa has some of the most beautiful scenery in the entire world. Now, along to go with Richard Nixon saying, Adolf Hitler once said, if you tell a lie long enough, eventually it becomes the truth. So we're going to see how that plays into this as well. Transatlantic slave trade. Would anybody disagree that this is not the beginning of Black history? But in our Common Core curriculum, it tells us that this is the beginning of Black history. Also, we have a very sophisticated Black history that has been told right here in America. Some of the names you may see: Jesse Owens, you may see Dr. King, you may see Malcolm X, you also may see Carter G. Wilson, you also may see Elijah Muhammad, Marcus Garvey. Again, is this the beginning of Black history? Some of the misconceptions of Africa and African Americans is the image that we see on television about African Americans. Does this represent all African Americans? You can say no if you want to.
No.
You can say yes if you want to. Absolutely not. Okay, I know this is a kind of a joke, but here. This is what we're taught in our Common Core curriculum. Black history. Black people fell from the sky and landed in slavery. The end. That's it. This is what our curriculum is telling us, that Black history started. Again, we're going to go deeper into that. Some more misconceptions I want to put out there. That Africans were primitive, lived in mud huts. The creation of African greatness must be accredited to Arabs, Europeans, Chinese, or even aliens. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Okay? Now, do we see about the ancient African kings? Shabaka, Terharka, Kashata. You can also see Shaka Zulu, Mansa Musa, Tutmosis III, Akmosa, King Tut, Nefertiti. What about some of the women of Africa? Well, if you didn't know, before any women liberation movements, Africa produced more women rulers than anywhere else in world history. So this is a history that's not just empowering for Africans, but empowering for our women as well. Now we got to ask ourselves, are we going to continue to trust dishonest scholarship? We're going to show you some dishonest scholarship as well through this presentation. But before we get into that, I would like to pose a question, and you could just raise your hand, again, if you agree or if you disagree. Now, there's a debate between two different forms of scholarship. There's Afrocentrism, and then there's Eurocentrism, okay? And I'm gonna ask you which one sounds worse after, and you can tell me, okay? So Afrocentrism is described as this: the extreme and cultural political movements whose mainly African American adherents regard themselves and all other blacks as syncretic Africans and believe that that the center worldview should positively reflect traditional African values. Okay, that is Afrocentrism. Eurocentrism refers to the discursive tendencies to interpret the histories and cultures from non-European societies from a European or Western perspective. Common features of Eurocentrism are ignoring and undervaluing what Asians or Africans did in their respective societies. So, what do you think? Afrocentrism is worse, or Eurocentrism? Give hands for Afrocentrism. In hands for Eurocentrism. Okay, all right, we're on the same page. Very good, very good. Okay, so let's talk about ancient Africa. Today we're going to talk a lot about ancient Egypt. Okay, this is a very interesting topic. A lot of us love ancient Egypt, the mystery of the pyramids, how they do these things, the Great Sphinx. Key to note that this was an African civilization. And talking about ancient math, the dimensions of the Great Pyramids is measured by pi, by its height is pi. The slope of each face of the Great Pyramid of Giza is 4 divided by pi. How did these ancient Africans know about mathematics, know about geometry, know about advanced algebra before these courses were even created? In fact, the Great Pyramid of Giza is the largest man-made expression of pi. Isn't that interesting, how these ancient Africans knew mathematics? Again, we talked about how this is always accredited to someone other than African people. In fact, they were done so well that some people believe that aliens created them. Dun, dun, dun. So, that's how masterful these ancient Egyptian people were. Okay, another scientific fact. The pineal gland in the brain is a reflection of the Eye of Horus. Okay, raise your hand if you've heard of the Eye of Horus before. Actually, if you turn around your dollar bill, your $1 bill, you can see the Eye of Horus on the top of the pyramid, which represents enlightenment. Okay, so this is a reflection, okay, of that. And what the pineal gland causes is what they call the Fibonacci, which is 2 become 1, 2 become 1, creating, and this was way before we understood this in ancient Africa. Okay, so these ancient Africans understood the ancient science and mathematics. Okay, again, we're going to be talking about ancient Egypt starting in 3200 BC. This is a very, very important topic. And people always ask me, they say, Kulu, why is ancient Egypt such a big topic? Why is being African so big? Well, ancient Egypt is big because it's the only African civilization that Africans have to prove is African. You ever think about that? I mean, you have different periods of Egypt that were conquered by. You had the Vandals, you had the French, you had the Turkish, you had the Arab invasion, you had the Greek invasion, you had the Roman invasion. Okay, so there were many different time frames, but we're going to start with the origins of ancient Egypt, which was known as Kemet. And Kemet means land of the blacks, or the black land. So here's a time period that can tell us a little bit about ancient Egypt in Kemet. Okay, this was done by Dr. Anthony Browder, a great scholar, starting with the first king of Egypt. His name was Narmer-Menes, and down to the New Kingdom, which you see King Tut. Also a great mention is Hatshepsut, who was one of my favorite ancient Egyptian rulers, and also down to Taharka of the 25th dynasty. Now notice here, when you see up here it says Kemet, which is land of the blacks, then it goes to Egypt. So what does Egypt, the word Egypt, come from? The word Egypt comes from an ancient temple known as Hekapatah, okay? And that is translated into Aegyptos, which was later translated into Egypt by the Greeks, okay? Very clear to know that. So we're going to do an eye test today, and we're going to see whether these ancient Egyptians, by our eyes, were African people. All right, so if you go to Egypt today, specifically Cairo, you're finding more Middle Eastern looking individuals, okay? Now we're going to ask ourselves about Egypt and also compare it to the United States of today. Would anyone disagree about 400 to 500 years ago, the United States looked like a completely different place? Absolutely. So this civilization of 3,000 plus years, obviously it has changed over time, right? Okay. But if you go south, this is in modern day Aswan, Egypt, which is known as the Nubian region, and compare it to the people of the ancient times, doesn't these people look more like the people by your eye test? Absolutely they do. Okay, we can still see more ancient Egyptian artifacts and artwork to show how these people depicted themselves. Now, are we going to trust how the ancient Egyptians have been depicted, or are we going to trust how they depicted themselves? Very important to know. Okay, here's some more depictions of the Egyptians, clearly African. You see the afro there, and the very stereotypical Negroid features. This is Narmer-Menes, which is the first pharaoh of Egypt. Now, Narmer-Menes, he is known to come from the south. Some say Uganda, some say Kenya, but around Eastern Africa. He came up into Northeast Africa and conquered this land, and he named it Kemet. Okay? And you can see with Narmer, very stereotypical Negroid features. This is Pharaoh Khufu. I like Khufu because his name rhymes with my name, Kulu. But and notice when you hear some of these names, they're African sounding. They're said with an African tongue. So you can kind of tell that these were ancient Africans. Khufu, he was known for building one of the pyramids, him and his son as well. This is Queen Ty. And Queen Ty is the grandmother of what you may know, who most people hear about, King Tut. Also, she was the great wife of Amenhotep III and the mother of Akhenaten. Now, when you watch a lot of these films, they're talking a lot about Akhenaten today in the connection with the aliens, by the way. Okay, so this is Amenhotep and Queen Tiye, who we just saw. Okay? Now, you see Amenhotep, he has his afro. Okay? And you see also Queen Tiye, who has an afro. And then she has her braids or her dreadlocks on the other side. Okay? Now, these ancient Egyptian people, they were not blind to the people who were around them. So if you look closely at the bottom of the screen, you see different people from different nations. You have your Asiatics, you have your Indo-Europeans, you have your other Africans, okay? And also you have people from other areas as well. In this depiction, they're all bowing to the pharaoh. At this particular time, it's very key to know that ancient Egypt was the megalithic civilization. It was what the USA is today. All right, this is Akhenaten. We just talked about Akhenaten. This is a very good depiction by Bas Utterwit. Let's give him a round of applause for this artificial intelligence redepiction of these individuals and how they might have looked. Okay? Now, controversy. Now, we talked about dishonor scholarship earlier. So, National Geographic tells us that we need a new face of King Tut. Now, can we read between the lines? Now, if anyone knows anything about Egyptian history, we would know that King Tut has many depictions of himself. Okay? Not that he really did anything glorious, but he always, Egyptians always want to make themselves look better than the next when it comes to the ancient kings. These are some depictions of King Tut. Did that look anything like what we just showed? Okay. How about this? This is a Nubian boy found in modern-day Aswan. I compared it to the actual sculpture of King Tut. What do you think? Looks closer to what he probably would have looked like? What do you think? Head nod is fine. Yeah, I think so. Pharaoh Hatshepsut. Okay. Now, we mentioned how Africa has produced more women rulers. We hear a lot about Cleopatra when it comes to ancient Egyptian queens. But to me, Hatshepsut was the greatest Egyptian queen of all. Okay? She built the Djeru, which is the temple you see there in the middle, which is called the Holy of Holies. She ruled for 20 years, 20 to 25 years, and had the most successful reign of peace in Egypt. This was Queen Hatshepsut. Tutmosis III, he's known as the Napoleon of ancient Kemet or ancient Egypt. He is considered the greatest conqueror of Egyptian history. He conquered as far south as ancient Kush, and as far north as the Black Sea, okay? And this is probably how he would have looked as well. Ramses the Great, I'm sure if you've watched movies like The Ten Commandments or any other movie about ancient Egypt, you've heard of Ramses. He was also considered to be one of the great conquerors of ancient Egypt. So, Vanessa Davies, my dear friend, she is an Egyptologist, and one of her main standpoints and proof of evidence of African origin of Egypt is the ancient Afro-Pix. These are ancient and they can be found in the Cairo Museum to this very day of these ancient hair picks. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the Greek scholars, but before we get into the Greek scholars, we want to talk about Imhotep. Raise your hand if you heard of Imhotep. Okay. Imhotep. He built the steps pyramid of Dozier. He was a great architect, also a great scholar, and also a founder of medicine. And as a matter of fact, Hippocrates practiced and taught medicine at the library at the School of Cos, but traveled widely to improve his knowledge. He was one of the Greek physicians who consulted the library of Imhotep. So Hippocrates was considered to be the father of medicine. How could he be the father if he learned from Imhotep? Isn't that interesting? But, controversy, how is Mr. Imhotep depicted? It doesn't look anything like what we just saw. Again, use your eyes, guys. Use those eyes, all right. Now, it's always been said in regards to traveling to the Americas or traveling by seas that Africans could not travel the seas. Well, what do we see here in the Luxor Museum of Egypt? We see Egyptians on boats and ships. So this was a common practice. In fact, Herodotus referred to them as great seamen. All right? We even have Michael Jackson in ancient Egypt, guys. Come on now. Let's get Mike. Mike was back there, y'all. Y'all remember that? Do you remember the time? Yeah, Mike was back in that time. Speaking of Mike, Michael did the first African depiction of ancient Egypt. Give Michael a hand, guys. Come on now. Give Michael a hand now. I don't know about Eddie Murphy now, but you know. All right. Also, again, the ancient Egyptians weren't blind to the people that were around them. If you look at figure A, it's how the Egyptian saw himself. If you look at figure B, that's how he saw the Indo-European. If you look at figure C, that's how he saw other black Africans, such as the Ethiopians or those of the Kushite nation. And D is how he saw the Semite, okay? If you look at figure A and figure C, is there much of a difference? Not in skin color, but if you look closely in culture, the Egyptian had 3 stripes, and the Ethiopian had 2. So it's a difference in swagger, okay? If you were in my session earlier, we talked about cultural differences being used in the ancient days instead of creed or color. Okay, Carl Richard Liptus, he was considered to be an Egyptologist of that time in Germany. And when he went to Egypt, he said, everywhere I looked to find an authentic Egyptian, instead I found an authentic Negro. So isn't this interesting that what he was expecting to believe, based off Eurocentrism, who he was also a victim of as well, he did not see. He was quite surprised that he kept seeing Africans all over ancient Egypt. Now, this is very key when we talk about dishonest scholarship. I got to give a shout out to Elizabeth Cobo because she is one of the people, her and Susan Goldberg, as well as Edmund Mason, they came together as a team to investigate National Geographic in regards to its profiling of different people of different races, okay? This is an April 2008 race issue for those who are looking for the resources. This publication had the first Jewish woman to be chief and editor, and this is what she set out to do. So she mentioned this: for decades, our coverage was racist. To rise above our past, we must acknowledge it. So she hired this guy named Edwin Mason, and he was investigating the magazine, and he found out, and until the 1970s, National Geographic all but ignored all people of color who lived in the United States, rarely acknowledging them beyond laborers or domestic workers. He also said this: my instructions were to dig deeper into the magazine and the archives and evaluate the ways that it had depicted black and brown people. Overseas and in the US, I found that its photographs and illustrations tended to position black and brown people as racial inferiors, as people inherently backwards and incapable of progress. Okay? So this is very, very key to note why some of our dishonest scholarship and some of the depictions we see of ancient Egypt are completely off. Some of the Greek scholars, we're going to talk about some of those Greek scholars who studied in ancient Africa. Okay, you got Socrates up here, Plato, Pythagoras. Herodotus, here's what he said about the ancient Egyptians. I have two quotes here. He said the Egyptians, the Colchians, and the Ethiopians, which is modern-day Sudan, are black-skinned and woolly-haired. He also said the Greek oracle was from Egypt because she was black, and those of the Nile Valley, skin is black because of the heat. Aristotle, this is what he had to say: those who are too black, for instance, like the Egyptians and the Ethiopians, are cowards. This is what he had to say. Okay, so according to Aristotle, the Egyptians, the Ethiopians were both considered black. Ammianus Marcellinus said most of the men of Egypt are skinny, are brown and black with a skinny, desiccated look. Okay, you can see some ancient depictions here. That's found in the Luxor Museum, and this was actually the writing of Ammianus Marcellinus as well. Count Constantine de Volney, all right, upon visiting the Sphinx, this is what he had to say. He said, just think, this very race of black men, today our slave and object to our scorn, is the very race to which we owe our arts, science, and even our use of speech. Isn't that interesting? Hollywood. Now we're going to see what Hollywood has done to contribute to this dishonest scholarship. All right. Who's seen these movies before? I know I really was a fan of 10 Commandments. I love that movie, and I love Elizabeth Taylor too. She was a beast in her time. But Christian Bale as an Egyptian, come on now. As Moses, no. No, Christian Bale, you gotta sit down. All right. Now, Gods of Egypt, they actually issued, Alex Prognez, he was the director of this film, Gods of Egypt. He actually, after the film, he actually issued an apology for casting an all-white cast for the ruling elite of ancient Egyptians, okay? After the movie had sold whatever it sold, he issued that apology, okay? Now let me ask you a question. I've been in the film industry. And in the film industry, you have what you call a casting director. Casting director finds people for these roles. Was this done by accident?
No.
Absolutely not. That's Alex Prognez, who I was just telling you about. And you can find that in CNN as well, November 28, 2015, where he issued this apology. So again, the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Ethiopians, or the Cushite people, as you see, you have your Egyptians here, and then on the other side, you have your Cushite nations. These are two different Africans. What scholarship has taught us, though, about these two nations is that they hated each other because one was white, the Egyptian, and the other was black, the Cushite, which is not true. as you can see, you got the Egyptian warriors looking like the Zulu warriors right here. Okay, so these are two different African nations. All right, so we're going to watch a video put together by the BBC and Zina Badwadi, who is a trailblazer in talking about the history of ancient Egypt and ancient Africa. Let's watch this.
At around 3000 BC, North Africa began to dry out, so more people from other parts of the continent converged on this narrow strip of land in the Nile Valley because they needed the water. UNESCO's General History of Africa studies showed that the earliest people in the Nile Valley were from an early human population in East Africa who moved north. Though some scholars still believe the Egyptians were right from the beginning made up of people from different regions of Africa who then mixed with migrants originally from Western Asia. I wonder how the Egyptians might identify themselves today. Well, to get an idea of this, I go to southern Egypt, where most of the country's historic monuments are situated. I drop by to meet the Suleiman family in the village of Al-Aqab, just outside Aswan.
أهلاً. أهلاً. Oh, good. We're being joined by other members of the family. أهلاً وسهلاً. شوفوا مرة ثانية. بتفتكروا يعني هي حضارة إفريقية ولا شيء غير إفريقي؟ أفريقية. حضارة أفريقية.
My local guide in Aswan is Fatima Muhammad Subhi. She studied Egyptology, and I ask her if she believes the ancient Egyptians were black.
I believe, yes, they were not white, but black because they always painted in dark red, not white at all. So this is a color which we have, different colors of black.
Was it an African civilization?
I believe, of course, the southern, the kings comes from the south. They were more similar, or looks like me and you. If you go more southern, you are more darker, so it's more African.
Okay. So give it up for Zina Badwadi, please. Boy, does that take courage to go up against Egyptologists or what has been taught commonly. Okay, so again, we talked about the different periods of Egypt. So when Kemet became Egypt, you're talking about the Roman rule in 30 BC, down to the Muslim conquest or the Arab invasion in 639 BC. So Egypt has had different changes, just much like the United States has changed and become more diverse over time, and different waves of people came. This was also a mega civilization, and it became different over time. All right, so understanding the term black people when it comes to how it's defined in the racial classification. Okay, it tells us black people is a skin-based classification used for specific people with mid to dark brown complexion. Not all black people are dark-skinned. However, in certain countries, often in socially based systems of racial classification in the Western world, it is used to describe persons who are perceived to be dark-skinned when compared to their other populations. Depending on the usage, it is mostly used for people of sub-Saharan African descent, the indigenous people of Oceania, Southeast Asia, and the Indian subcontinent. So when we just look at the term black, it's not just sub-Saharan Africans as well. There's many others added. I want to shout out to Sheikh Anta Diop. He was a great African teacher who actually in the 1974 symposium challenged Egyptology, okay? Proving that this was an African civilization. This is a great book to read, The African Origin of Civilization, Myth, or Reality. Please check this book out. All right, now we're going to watch another one from a Chinese botanist. This is going to be very brief, and then we're going to go further. All right, let's give it up for him for discovering his history, guys. All All right, but Egypt was not all that happened in Africa. We're going to go through these very fast, guys, okay? So, ancient Kush, known as the land of the bow because they were great archers in warfare. Very key to note that there's over 100 more pyramids in ancient Kush, which is modern-day Sudan, in ancient Kush. So they had a cultural exchange between these two nations. Okay, so Diodorus of Sicily, in General History's book, Volume 3, here's what he had to say about the Kushites, who were also known as the Ethiopians. And Ethiopian just means of the burnt face. It wasn't a racist term, it's just how they described ancient Africans, the Greeks described them. So here's what he had to say. He said, the Ethiopians, as historians relate, were the first of all men, and the proof of this statement is manifest. So according to this Greek philosopher, the Ethiopian civilization was considered to be the oldest, even considered to be older than ancient Egypt. Kandaka Imani Reyes. This is a depiction of her. Kandaka Imani Reyes, she went toe-to-toe with the great Roman Empire, okay? He talked about those African women, warrior women. I'm sure you've seen about the Woman King or the Wakanda warriors. Well, Imani Reyes was one of those stories. In fact, she cut the head off Augustus Caesar's statue and buried it under her temple in modern-day Sudan, which was just found, I believe, in the 1980s, okay? She lost her son in battle with the Romans, she lost her husband, and she even lost her eye. She was known as the one-eyed queen. But the Romans were forced, this was at the height of the Roman Empire, the Romans were forced to come to a peace treaty with them, so she saved her people from taxation and colonization. Outside of Africa, there were people known as the Moors, okay? They ruled Spain from 711 AD to 1492. Who knows what happened in 1492, y'all? Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? All right. All right, so these Moors, these black African Moors, North Africans who came up into Spain, they conquered it, okay? And they civilized, they created over 200 thousands of public bathrooms, as well as increased the hygiene there and built marvelous temples and universities. These ancient Moors, they went back and studied the philosophy of the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Greeks, and they restored them in bringing forth what we know today as the European Enlightenment. What was happening in Europe at this particular time? We're talking about the 1300s, the 1400s, the 1500s. You're talking about the Black Death or the bubonic plague, okay? You're also talking about the Little Ice Age, coldest time in European history at this time. Crop failure was happening. War, the 100 Years' War, that was happening amongst them as well. And this is around this time, this is around the 13th century, ancient Benin, okay? If you've seen the story of the Woman King, this is similar. As you see, this is the largest man-made construction before the mechanical period, the Wall of Benin, 4 times the size of the Great Chinese Wall. And you can find many of these Benin artifacts and Yoruba artifacts in the British Museum and the French Museum as well. This is the head of Ife, made of 14 different metal alloys. You can also find this in London's museum as well. Okay, this is a Yoruba king. I always look at this and always think that looks similar to the head of the Statue of Liberty. I don't know if it may be just fooling me, but it looks like it a little bit to me. Abyssinia Castle. Again, remember we heard about that misinterpretation of ancient African history. It said that Africans only built mud huts. They were incapable of building castles like this. This is in Eastern Africa, modern-day Ethiopia. Okay? And also, 4th century Christian church. Okay? This is before. Many people would argue and say that Europeans brought the Bible to Africa. Well, this was the 4th century. This is before the King James Bible was put together. Okay? So this is the first Christian church during the reign of King Azana. And also you see here in this in Abyssinia an obelisk. Okay? Mansa Musa, estimated worth over 500 billion in gold. You cannot compare anyone's wealth to this man that is living today, because the US dollar is not backed by gold anymore. So 500 billion in gold. In fact, when he traveled to Mecca, he gave away so much gold that it bankrupted Egypt's economy. Okay? And as you see there, he's holding the solid gold globe in his hand. So he also, at this time, ancient Africans and most people around the world still believed that the world was flat, and he understood it that it was a sphere or a globe. Hannibal Barker, I'm sure you may have heard of Hannibal as well. You can see the coin there, it's a little dark there, but he has those stereotypical Africoid features. But again, how has he been depicted? Probably not African. The Dahomey Amazons, which represent what we know as the woman warriors, okay? They really existed, as you see here. That's what the story of the Woman King was, and that's what the Wakanda warriors were inspired by. They existed. Shaka Zulu was my great ancestor. You hear the name Kulu in Zulu. I am descendant of the Bantu tribe, okay? Another great African king who was pretty well known. In fact, his movie series of 1986 was the most watched TV series until 1992, okay? The great ruins of Zimbabwe. Again, are we still talking about mud huts as all Africans did? No, we've seen contrary to that. Kilwa Kisiwani of Tanzania. All right, this is the 8th century. 4th century, the ruins of Congo, where we find most of our rubber, where we find most of the diamonds, the gold, ancient Congo. They came before Columbus. This is another book I want to put out by Ivan Van Sertima. Now, it was discovered that they found different plants in America that are indigenous to Africa, such as the bottle gourd, such as the squash, the sweet potato, the yam. These things were already in America before Columbus arrived. And Columbus actually stated in his fourth voyage that the Native Americans of Hispaniola told him that they were trading with blacks who came in large ships before Columbus, okay? So that's something that you can dig deeper in at another time. Now, so we're going to talk about this. We've just learned close to about 4,000 years of African history. My dear friend, Jane Elliott, I actually got an opportunity to interview her on my podcast some years ago, and it was just such enlightening. But here's what she said that I'll always take with me. She says, we've been lied to about the number of races there are in the world, when in fact there's one race, the human race, that sprouted out of Africa thousands of years ago. Professor Louis Leakey, he's another one. Look what he had to say. Now, Louis Leakey didn't stay very long in Europe, Asia, or America searching for the origins of humanity. He found himself in the Horn of Africa, and just a small quote of what he says, the past clearly shows that we have a common origin and that all our differences in race, color, and creed are only superficial. So, in closing, guys, today your summit theme has been climate change, learn, engage, and take action. How have you done that today? Well, through the workshops, you learned today. Through this keynote, you showed up and you learned that today. So give yourself a round of applause for that. And also, how did you engage today? I know those who were in my workshop, I made y'all work, I made y'all run a little bit, right? So you guys engaged, so you should be commended for that as well. Give yourself a round of applause. Take action. This is the part that is very, very important. Okay, some of us are still in this world, some people are still living for themselves and not thinking about the future. You are the future. The children are our future. So those coming after you, those are the ones that we have to take action with. Marcus Garvey once said, a people without knowledge of their past history, origin, or culture is like a tree with no root. Now think about that. If a harsh windstorm came, would you rather be a tree newly planted, mulched into the ground, or a tree deeply rooted in the soil for years? well, I'm sure you would want to be that tree deeply rooted in the soil for years so you can survive that storm and stand firm. My father always used to tell me, what you do for yourself depends on what you think of yourself. What you think of yourself depends on what you know of yourself. What you know of yourself depends on what you've been told. What have we been told about Africa? We have to relearn. Therefore, I would like to conclude by saying that Black History is not just a month. It's 365, y'all. And it's 365 not just because it's about Black people and the Black origins of humanity, but it's 365 because it's everyone's history. Thank you, and Ashe.
So I have an advice-oriented question.
Okay.
I wanted to know, what is your advice on how to combat inequality between races, especially as a person of color? How would you advise us to overlook that inequality when we still hold on to resentment from our oppressors, when we still, even though we know our history and we understand that we are one, should we be forgiving our oppressors, and like how do we move forward, especially when that side of the community doesn't always want to work with us?
Yeah, obviously you're going to want to work with people that are more like yourself, as I mentioned today in my workshop today, okay? Sometimes that doesn't work out. But when we talk about like-minded individuals, that could be any color, creed, or anyone, okay? You can be like-minded with anyone, so start there. The second thing that needs to happen is we have to learn this history. We have to learn it. If a person in the DEI space, we're finding that a lot of people who are what they call quote-unquote racist, they're uneducated. They're miseducated as well, okay? So that is a big problem. That's why we have to relearn these things. If a people look at you that you've done nothing great or have contributed nothing to the history of humanity, they're not going to respect you. They're not going to think you deserve anything. They're just going to think that you're just maybe freeloading or just here or just there, but they're not going to have any respect for you. So learning our history is very important. And using ancient Africa as the centerpiece of all history, I think is very important to getting us there.
Hello. You mentioned earlier the research institute that you founded, please correct me if I'm wrong, and worked for. Do you or the institution have any plans to combat the current erasure of African and African American history that's going on in the education system, particularly with notion to the banning of African American courses in high school and middle school and things like that?
You're referring to critical race theory?
Yeah.
Definitely a very good question. We want to cover history from, again, 32 BC down to this very day, the accomplishments of African people all over. And what we didn't get into today, because for the sake of time, was the accomplishments of African Americans. We're talking about constant innovations, okay? We're talking about countless discoveries. We're talking about countless inventions. I was just doing a seminar a few weeks ago about the stoplight, right? That was done by a Black man. And think about the colors of Black History Month. And that's the same colors of the stoplight. So that history is very important. We cannot tell history from an episodic way. We have to tell it holistically. So we have to start all the way back from ancient Egypt and come all the way down to the present day. And that's also including what Africans were accomplishing in the UK as well, what they were accomplishing in Asia, what they were accomplishing in modern day Australia as well, to be included into that. And the islands too, we can't forget the islands too.
Hi, I'm Michaela.
Hi, Michaela.
Could you give a suggestion to that biggest inhibitor, which is you said miseducation or lack of education from the people who need it the most, and from those who are trying to find themselves as well?
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, especially when calling out the dishonoring scholarship or the scholarship they're deliberately meant to miseducate or end the scholarship that's just repeating traditions of Black suffering and images as you presented earlier.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges there. Is some people have put their whole life behind this deception. So they're gonna fight you pretty hard. So you have to have some tough skin. When I came out with my novel, I can tell you I received hundreds of hate emails, death threats even, okay? So you're gonna have tough skin doing this, but again, I started to see the benefits. Thank God for Wakanda, y'all. When Wakanda came out, that kind of, people laid off me a little bit. Because then everybody started getting interested in African culture. But again, we just have to keep raising the awareness. Things aren't gonna change overnight. Professor Kava Kavanaugh once told me that this is a 50-year plan. It's gonna take a long time. It took a long time for us to get here. It's gonna take a long time for us to get to where we need to be, but we're in the right direction right now. Hopefully, our children get to see it. So we just gotta keep at it, keep at the work. Once you know, you have a responsibility. Each one teach one.
Thank you.
I was wondering, going off of that last question, were there people close in your life that you found gave you backlash or that you weren't expecting a negative response from? And how did you handle that? Because I feel like a lot of people will experience people close to them letting them down by constricting their own mindset to what they used to know, especially with this adaptation and evolution of what we know.
Yeah, my wife was very strong with me, and she really helped me to get through this because she has a very positive outlook on stuff like this. But my father was very, very inspirational. He's from Cameroon, and I remember as a child, and we did this project on King Tut, and I was in, I believe it was maybe 4th grade it was, and I depicted King Tut as Black. I got a sculpture, we painted him dark skinned and everything. And I was the only one who brought a mannequin to school and painted it, put clay on it, did all that nice good stuff, and I got a B-. And the teacher said, because it's historically inaccurate. So that's where this foundation of strength came from. Came from back then in 4th grade, But there were family members who were saying, like, maybe this fight is a road that you don't want to go down because it could be dangerous for you. But those people like my wife and also my father were very inspirational to telling me to keep pushing forward. There's light at the end of the tunnel. Don't give up. You've already put this out there, so you got to go with it. But there was times where I definitely wanted to give up, and I was like, is this even worth fighting for? But I did start to see that light at the end of the tunnel. Obviously, I'm here now, right? So.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming and for sharing this. So this is kind of a setup question based on some responses I've received from students when teaching about ancient Kemet, and I want to get your response to kind of share out. I found for myself, because I didn't really consciously understand ancient Kemet as Black until I was in my late 20s. And then teaching it in class, there was this moment with students, especially Black students, where there's this ownership of this identity and themselves, and I saw the transformation. So since you have been around the world and you've talked to different people, I'm sure you've met a lot of Black people who did not know about ancient Kemet. I wanted to know more about the positive responses you received and what people have said to you as a result of what you have exposed to them about their history.
Yeah, some of the positive feedback, people always say, thank you for this. A lot of people thank me, and it's not just African Americans. It's people of all different colors, races, and creeds that thank me for this information because, again, in order for miseducation to exist, everybody has to be misled. Not just Black people, all right? Everyone, okay? So people are genuinely happy most of the time when I'm doing a lot of my speaking engagements. Sometimes there is pushback, But some of the positive is thank you for helping me to know who I am. And when I talk to a lot of people, sometimes, particularly African Americans, would say to me, well, I don't know what part of Africa I'm from. So how does this connect to me? How does I'm not an Egyptian, or most of the people in transatlantic slave trade were taken from West Africa. Well, here's what I always say. Africans were not just people who stayed in one place. Desertification happens, migration happens, immigration happens. One nation rises, another nation falls. People moved around. So my father, he was from Cameroon, but how do I know 2 generations before him, they didn't migrate there from another distant land? So what I tell people is all of the history belongs to you. All of the history of Africa belongs to you.
So thank you for the work you're doing. I think it's critical. And I guess I see the significance of how it can empower the future generations of Black children, but I guess I have a question about an important nuance that I think might possibly undermine or challenge the sort of future benefit of the work, right? So I take it there's an important distinction between the claim that the ancient Egyptians, King Tut, Ramses, were all Black, versus on the other hand, the ancient Egyptians were dark-skinned and had phenotypes that we would now commonly associate with Black people, right? And I'm skeptical of a notion of a racial category that applies both to people thousands of years ago and also to modern day individuals. And if you accept that, I guess I'm just wondering, how do you communicate the work and engage your project, which I take it is aimed at empowering, sort of Black children who are going to be educated and consume representations of ancient African civilizations. How do you get the sort of positive benefit that I take it you want to instill with them, while also avoiding claims like the ancient Egyptians were Black? Because again, I have reasons, but I think I'm skeptical of a racial category that applies both to ancient people as well as to modern day people.
Right. Very good question. And there in the early 1900s, you had what they called Negroes, and they had what you called Hamites, okay, or Hamitic people. Now, Hamitic people were people who are of the darker hue, but had maybe a slight narrow nose, or slight straight hair. These were separated, okay? So now you started to have people saying that the people in sub-Saharan Africa are Negroes, and then the people of Northern Africa, who are also dark, have the dark phenotype as well, are something other than African, okay? So this is where we have to start that discussion. Now, if you were in the workshop earlier, or if you weren't, we discussed a little bit about the problems of racial classification. Because Africa itself is a very diverse place. And let's make this be known as well. Africa is not the only place where Black people lived, okay? There are a vast amount of Black people who are in the Middle East. There are a vast indigenous people to Australia that are Black as well, or what we would consider Black in this country. But we're going according to the Western constructs of race. So based off those Western constructs, the ancient Egyptians would be Black. I hope that answers your question. But also, I wanted to make this very clear too, about the ancient Egyptians. This was a mega civilization. Therefore, there were multiple groups of people coming into this civilization, just like the United States is today. So for me to sit here and tell you that Egypt was 100% Black, I would be lying to you, okay? So it was a diverse, but the indigenous people of that land were Africans, or Black Africans.